Madam President, I announced my decision to vote against Judge Kavanaugh several weeks ago after meeting with him, after studying his record, because he has essentially put his thumb on the scale in support of corporate interest. He has consistently sided with corporate special interests, large corporations which outsource jobs over workers, and has sided with Wall Street over consumers. I made that decision before Dr. Ford came forward, but I'm grateful for her. I'm grateful she did, even at great personal cost and personal risk. I believe Dr. Ford. Why in the world would someone do what she did, again, at great personal cost and great personal risk, if she weren't telling the truth precisely? I'm grateful to her. I'm grateful for all the brave women inspired by her to speak out and share their own stories. Many of them have written to my office. A number of them I've spoken to on the phone. Some of them told us for the first time in their lives after one woman was in her 70s, and it was the first time she had spoken of her sexual assault. Please understand, to all the people, all the women and men, and I've gotten letters from men too, but mostly women, understand, to all of you and all over the country, we see you, we hear you, your story matters, and you make a difference. It's wrong that political influence and artificial deadlines put on them, these deadlines imposed by the majority leader down the hall and the President of the United States, artificial deadlines and political influence prevented the FBI from performing the complete and thorough investigation the American people deserve. Instead, Senate leaders in the White House straitjacketed the FBI. I don't blame the FBI. They only did what Senate leaders, what Republican leaders who wanted to ram this nomination through as quickly as possible, and the White House, who would never want to compromise on anything like this, they straitjacketed the FBI. They kept our law enforcement professionals from doing their job. According to Dr. Ford's lawyer, the FBI didn't even speak to more than a dozen witnesses that Dr. Ford asked them to interview. So they are trying to corroborate whether her story was true, but then the FBI then didn't interview Dr. Ford or Judge Kavanaugh, nor did they interview the people that Dr. Ford suggested them to, the names that Dr. Ford gave them, people who could corroborate what happened. So the FBI did not interview any of the people that Dr. Ford asked, or Dr. Ford herself, and then my colleagues say, there's no corroborating evidence, so she didn't do it, so we have to believe Judge Kavanaugh. That is their logic. The investigation, not because the FBI didn't want to do it right, but because of what political leadership, elected officials did in the White House and bureaucrats in the White House and the Senate to prevent the FBI from doing its job. That's why that was a scam. But what really matters here, it really matters that we listen to women. It also really matters because the Supreme Court has enormous influence over the lives of everyone in my state. Any nominee must defend the rights of all Americans to have comprehensive health care coverage and make their own health care decisions. Must defend the rights of Americans to collectively bargain for safe workplaces and fair pay. I don't think my colleagues really understand the process of collective bargaining. Madam President, I'm working bipartisanly with a number of our colleagues on a pension bill right now. I don't know that our colleagues here understand that people, when it comes to pensions, they sit down at the bargaining table, they give up wages today so they'll have a secure retirement. I'm concerned about this Supreme Court's rejection potentially of collective bargaining rights and for safe workplaces and fair pay and fair benefits. I'm concerned about this court in terms of protecting American workers and American consumers from discrimination and, shall we say, Wall Street greed. I'm troubled already by the Supreme Court's recent decisions stripping rights from Ohioans on many issues. That's why I met with Judge Kavanaugh before I made my decision earlier this summer, and why I asked him about his views on the issues that matter to Ohioans. I reviewed his record. I'm not a lawyer, but I pay a lot of attention to these issues. I look at these decisions. I listened to Ohioans who weighed in. It was clear that I could not support Judge Kavanaugh's nomination to our highest court. Again, because he puts his thumb on the scale of justice in always with a bias towards corporate interests, over workers, over consumers, on health care. I mean, you have heard Senator Shaheen and Senator Markey, Senator Hassan, I listened to late last night. You've heard them talk about pre-existing condition, that this court is moving towards saying to the health insurance industry, you can cancel the insurance of people with pre-existing condition. For 10 years, we've had consumer protections. If you're a cancer survivor, if you have asthma, as my wife has had it at a young age and has continued to manage her asthma well, and she has said very publicly that we can talk about this, or if you have Parkinson's or you have any other pre-existing condition, heart disease or high blood pressure, that you are protected from the insurance company canceling your insurance. That's been the law for 10 years. That law is under duress. If this body votes to confirm Judge Kavanaugh today, it means that 5 million Ohioans, almost half the people in my state, have a pre-existing condition. It means that they should be concerned that this Supreme Court will take away those consumer protections and will say to the insurance company, yeah, you can cancel somebody if they get expensive. You can cancel somebody's insurance if you find out they had cancer. You can do all those things. His rulings and positions on the rights of Ohio workers and women and consumers would take us in exactly the wrong direction. His nomination comes when the stakes for working Ohioans couldn't be higher. He will talk about settled law, but settled law is only settled. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but this is pretty obvious. Settled law is only settled until the Supreme Court says it isn't. We know it with voter rights. We know it just recently with worker rights. Last term, the court issued a string of anti-worker decisions. In Janus versus AFSCME, the court overturned decades of precedent, oh yeah, settled law, and limited public sector unions' ability to advocate for the workers they serve. This is a Supreme Court that's almost always sides with corporations over unions, with corporations over workers, with corporations over consumers. The decision Epic Systems Corp versus Lewis limited workers' ability to have their day in court when they're mistreated by their employer. The power already rests with employers on all of these kinds of worker-employer issues. This court wants to make it worse. Judge Kavanaugh's record shows that he will accelerate that direction. This court's proved time and again it stands on the side of powerful corporations, not American workers. And we know what's happened in this country. We know that profits have gone up. We know that executive compensation has exploded. We know that productivity is up for workers, but we know that workers' wages have been stagnant. So the top 1% or 5%, they're doing great. They get big tax cuts. They get stock dividend buybacks. They get all kinds of breaks. But the fact is, workers seen their wages stagnate. This court will make it worse. There are several cases next term where the court has the power to fundamentally tip the balance of power even further towards corporations. Cases like Lamps Plus Inc. versus Varela, where the court could rule on whether a worker can file a class action suit against an employer that violates her privacy and releases personal information to the public. An individual worker never has the power or the money to hire an attorney to take on these companies. That's why workers need to band together to take on a powerful company, a powerful employer, a powerful corporation. Another case, New Prime Inc. versus Oliveira, where the court will decide whether a worker who is misclassified as an independent contractor can bring a class action lawsuit, whether the Federal Arbitration Act applies to independent contractor agreement. In other words, this court has already moved in the direction, as this Congress did by one vote, if I recall, have already moved in the direction of giving corporations more power in saying to employees, sorry, you don't get your day in court. Because again, employees individually don't have the financial wherewithal to be able to go to court, hire a lawyer. But if the employees band together, they can. That's what the issue of forced arbitration is about. That's what Judge Kavanaugh has consistently been wrong about. I've looked at his record. It's clear we can't trust him to stand with Ohio workers in any of these cases. He's opposed basic protections for workers trying to hold employers accountable. Cases like AFGE versus Gates. He's consistently ruled against claims of worker discrimination and and worker safety violations. He's consistently ruled against workers who stand up to corporate mistreatment in cases like Verizon New England versus the National Labor Relations Board. His nomination also poses a serious threat, as I said, to the 5 million Americans under age 65 with pre-existing condition. Again, that's half of my state. If you meet a 40 or 50-year-old, if you're in almost any group, you sit there, you look to your right, you look to your left, one of those two people on the average is going to has a pre-existing condition. Is their insurance going to be jeopardized? It is, if this Congress, which wants to do this, in this Supreme Court, and this president want to strip away the protections for the consumer protections for people with pre-existing condition. If they want to give the insurance companies the right to cancel your insurance, oh, you get cancer, you cost us a lot I'm an insurance company, you cost us a lot. Well, I'm going to cancel your insurance then because you cost us too much money. You can't do that under present law. You can't do that because of the Affordable Care Act. You'll be able to do it if Judge Kavanaugh gets in the court, because you can bet the court's moving in that direction. The consumer protections are under attack in our court system right now with the case Texas versus the United States. It is likely going to make its way to the Supreme Court, and Judge Kavanaugh's record on health care gives us a pretty darn good clue how he would rule. He refused to uphold the entire law is constitutional, a law that says if your child has diabetes or your mother has asthma, the insurance companies can't raise your costs or turn them away. This is about the cost of health insurance. It's about saying to all of us want good insurance. All of us want to be able, nobody wants to get sick. Nobody wants to have high health care costs. The reason we have insurance is so that people that get sick can make sure they keep their insurance and can have help. But the insurance companies, if they get their way now, they may not deny you care if you have cancer. They'll just raise your rate so high that you won't be able to afford it. There really is no difference. So without these protections, insurance companies will once again be free to charge you 5 times the rate of your neighbor. You're sick, you have neighbors on both sides that aren't, they'll raise your rates because you're sick, if they have their way. We can't risk. You're lucky enough to be well. Your neighbor's diagnosed with high blood pressure. Your other neighbor, his child has epilepsy. Their rates get raised, yours don't, all because Judge Kavanaugh in this court, in this Congress, seems to want it that way. We can't risk Ohio families having access to care by sending in the Supreme Court. It's just not on pre-existing condition where he would pose a threat to Ohioans' health care. Dozens of cases pending in lower courts that could determine the price you pay for health care over the next few years or whether you get care at all. Again, if the price is so high, it's the same as denying you care because you can't afford it. Cases on everything from false advertising by insurance companies to whether your employer is required to give you access to health care. And of course, we know that the stakes are particularly high for women. That was true before Dr. Ford courageously came forward. It remains true. We can't risk Ohio women's ability to make their own personal private health decisions between themselves and their doctors by giving a lifetime appointment to a judge who's shown repeated hostility to women's health care and freedom. We know the promises President Trump made when he was a candidate, saying that he would put somebody on the Supreme Court that would overturn Roe v. Wade. We know the list of judges he chose from, and the Federal Society had that same commitment to overturn Roe v. Wade. Anybody in this body that thinks that the judge promising that this is settled law ought to, with the cliche that I got a bridge to sell you. I mean, it's clear what he's going to do if it's on the court. This fundamentally, Madam President, this whole issue this whole vote, this whole nomination comes down to whose side are you on? Are you a judge who stands on the side of workers or multinational corporations? Will you stand on the side of a mother seeking treatment or on the side of insurance companies who want to raise her rates to deny her care? Judge Kavanaugh's record's clear. He's consistently sided with the most powerful special interests in this country, not American workers, not American consumers, not American patients who struggle with the cost of their health care. The stakes for Ohio are too high to give this justice a lifetime appointment to our highest court. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that several documents corroborating Dr. Ford's allegations against Judge Kavanaugh and a statement from Dr. Ford's attorneys be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Thanks, President. I yield the floor.